Hello, my name is Jerry Kohn. I'm the founder and co-owner of Corvette Central. Today I'd like to take you through the process of restoring a C1 dash insert, something that I've been doing for quite some time. When you purchase the insert, it actually looks like so. We've been manufacturing these right here in southwestern Michigan since 1978. To date, they've run just under 19,000 of them. As you know, there's three different versions of the dash inserts. You have first of all the white lettered ones, then there's one with black letters and without the bars. Then of course you have the one that's pre-punched with the bar holes right in it. We also make the little bars right here at Corvette Central. Over the years, when as I sold these inserts at the show, I used to have this little 5-minute spiel I did to explain to people how to do an assembly on it. And since I'm not doing shows anymore, I guess we thought a video of this might be in order. All right, the first order of business here is actually to get a sense of the orientation of the parts, a step that I don't spend any real time doing because I've obviously seen these before. But what you need to understand is how the whole assembly fit together in the first place. You'll notice that there's a hole right here at either end, and that hole matched up to the front hole in the grab bar. Now it's pretty evident, I'm going to show you in a minute here, it's pretty evident that these holes were put in an assembly, but if you just kind of eyeball it up, you get a sense of the match of the hole to the ends of these two strips. And you can go along, and I would just do this so that you understand what you're dealing with here. Now, just because like I say that they were done in assembly, notice there's two holes there, and I'm pretty sure looking at the way it was, it matched up to the back one, although there's a mark in the insert that gives you the impression it was ahead a little farther. Anyway, once you understand how that all works, what I do is I actually mark the overhang of the stainless strip there and there. I do this on both ends, and I like the letters B and T. I guess you could use L and U, whatever you think's best. Here, I'll show you something that happened to this insert. This is one where somebody threw something, probably threw some stuff in the package tray assembly and really dented this strip. I'm going to disassemble this, and I believe I can fix that. But so I do fix some that are, most of the time they aren't quite that bad, but we'll see what we can do with it. Okay, once you're comfortable with the orientation of the parts, the next thing to do is to get your tools ready for the actual disassembly procedure, which the good news is it doesn't really take a lot of fancy tools to get a dash insert assembly apart. First thing you're going to need is some kind of an air tool with a cutoff wheel on it works. If you have a cutoff wheel on a shaft, that'll work just great. You need a carbide burrs in order, a small one like this, and a Dremel to run it. Then something like my little homemade little pry bar here. All this is a long shank, good quality screwdriver that I've sharpened into a chisel-like point. This works really good for any time you're doing restoration projects where you're taking apart something that really wasn't intended to be taken apart. You almost invariably need a tool like this. Doing dash inserts, really the whole trick to this is to get the strips off there with as little stress and distortion as you possibly can. That means no hammers, no chisels, no pliers, no torches, just patience. So just take it slow. It will come off there. Then, and just as there's three different inserts, there are three different methods of assembling the dash inserts. First, the early version is solder, which I wish they would have soldered all of them. This would be a much easier job. Normally, if you take your cutoff wheel and just run along there, you're okay. If you're going to run along there, you just wipe out the solder. The solder generally didn't penetrate anything under the strip, and you can see that strip just wants to come loose. There you can see my orientation mark and we're working at the top. Some people even can get that solder off there chemically. Some guys I've seen do that. I just as soon just depend on my grinding wheel. Next generation was actually, this is probably out of a 60, 59s, and some of the 60s were brazed. A lot of times, again, the brass did not penetrate the stainless steel in the housing very well. So although you'll see a blob of it there, like here, you can see a little blob of it there. I haven't even tried to grind that. It just simply wasn't holding anything. Now on this end, you'll see another, here's some brass here, and say, whoop, that one's not going to come off that way. So the next, what you do, the Dremel, normally you can kind of see where the brass ends under the strip, and there you can see that it just broke free. The third version, which is later in 60, then all the way through to 62, they actually spot welded the strips on. Those spot welds can vary anywhere from one here that's really deep, it really caught the whole strip and is really heavy, all the way to one that's just right off the very edge here, which is, you can just visualize the difference. You can see here where I've actually ground away one of the really deep ones. That was quite a chore to get that off of there. But that's the whole process, and that's the whole trick, to just break those strips loose like that. What I do is I go along and I break all those points loose. Then I like to, I'll grab and I'll do all my cleaning on the actual strips, both the back side and the front side. You can see this one I just worked ahead of myself, and I went and I actually ran this top strip. I run those on a buffer before I take them off. Obviously, if you take them off, you wouldn't want to try to buff them. That would be extremely dangerous. And next is just the process of removing the strip, which I like to just kind of go along like so. You can see rust popping out of there. I'm doing the lower one first, by the way. I always do that because it's going to be the hardest, and I just think I might as well get to the hardest part of the job. You'll notice on the brazed and soldered ones, they only did 5 spots, which left the center at the bottom blank. Then they decided when they spot welded, they really spot welded, and they did 6 places. If I go along and give it a good pop like that, then I can just usually work my way back and start. You can actually see the rust coming out from underneath that strip. And this is a pretty rusty insert, not as bad as some, but it's pretty rusty. Usually by the time I get back there, it's wanting to start coming off. Pretty tight strip here. Normally I don't do this over this board. I was trying to do that so you could actually see it better. I actually do them over my knee, which, if you look at the point on this tool, probably is a little scary. That's going to be the hardest part of this whole job. First of all, getting the strip off, and especially the bottom strip. And you can see what it looks like underneath there. It's pretty messy. We've gone this far, we might as well just take the top one off, and you can just see what the whole thing really looks like. See the top one? It's not nearly as tight as the bottom one. I think that's partly due to the rust and partly due to the fact they never did seem as tight. There's what it normally looks like inside of there. Pretty nasty looking stuff. Okay, now that we've got the insert disassembled, the next thing is cleaning up this whole mess. Because next to stress on the bar, on the strips and getting it apart really without damaging it, is really to have everything really clean and really ready to put back together. I like to take and cut down this leading edge a little bit. Just run down the whole thing. What you're doing is really you're taking, especially along the bottom, you're going to get rid of that nasty pitted edge there. It's just nothing but going to be aggravating putting it back together, number one. Number two, you're also going to increase the clearance of the strip to go back on there by giving it a little bit more of a relief by filing away some of the material. Once I've got that straightened out, then next is to take a small wire brush like so and get the inside of these strips cleaned up. They're just, especially the lower one, which I'd already buffed here, is really usually pretty full of rust. You could probably see the rust raining out of it. So get that, make sure you got that nice and clean. Good time to wipe the inside edge before you start thinking about putting it back on. You got probably some buffing residue there. With that, you're actually ready to start the reassembly process. We've got this glass beaded, all clean. The leading edges are nice and smooth. We always paint the inside of it just with a coat of this gray paint. The idea being that we're going to keep the aluminum away from the metal housing. As you saw here, all that white material is actually the corrosion of the aluminum. So we've actually painted ours. You want to make sure this is all really nice and clean and ready to go back together. The orientation of the housing itself, this is clearance for the right-hand wiper transmission. If you look at it in your car, you'll see it to the right of center. So this is always your orientation, the notch to the right. Obviously put the lettering in there so you can read it. I guess that part's self-explanatory. Now we've got our strips marked. I always like to put the bottom one on first because it's really the hardest one going back on, just like it was the hardest one coming off. And I like to do that so I don't contend with the flex of the rest of the insert. I want nothing in my way. I just want to get that bottom one on there. When I'm doing one that has holes for bars like you see here, I start out by lining up the holes, of course, to the holes that are there. Then I line my mark up to the end. Right away I should be able to see that my insert and my notch and the end, everything's matching. That's a pretty good sign we're off to a good start. Like I always told people, if you got everything clean and ready to go back together, these things almost just jump right back together. It's not that hard to do. It was all, the hard part was getting everything ready and the patience to get it apart without disturbing something. Now as this top one goes on, you're going to notice when you get to the middle, don't worry about the bottom and the ends popping back off. They're not going anywhere. When you get to the middle, right in here, you're going to notice that it's going to get real tight right in there. So you just go very slowly past that point. In a minute, I'm going to show you what can happen if you get carried away. If you start really struggling with it and lose your patience, let's just say lose your patience. Okay. There you go, that dash inserts back together. That's really all it took to do that. All right, once you've got the strips back on the insert, as I just showed you, it's a good idea to double check that orientation that we talked about. We went right by our marks, but in a lot of cases, I'm not so sure that the way they did it, they necessarily had it as close as you could get it. They didn't do it the way we're doing it, so This one looks pretty darn good. Yeah, that's fine. You could maybe get it a hair closer, but you gain a little here, lose a little there. I don't know if it would change much. I went ahead and put a clamp on this end. It was wanting to kind of pop open, which is not unusual. And the reason I clamped it like that is that's one of the best ways I know of to actually fasten the insert together. What I do them that way. I have a device that I use, but I just simply hit it in the 6 spots with a small spot weld. When you're doing this one in the center, don't put your clamp too close to the strip because they have a tendency to pop back a little. You can almost put a little whoop in the strip by if you get your clamp right next to it. So move up back here and clamp, put your weld up that way, like so. Then when you're done with that weld, what I do is I come back and I go over this whole area with a small sanding belt. And I sand down any distressed area that I have on my stainless. I knock the weld down nice and flat. You're not weakening the weld. You're simply removing any burr or any chance of some material that could actually cut or bother your installation into the dash. So that's really about the last step to the actual assembly of the dash insert. I'm going to go back and talk about, just warn you about a couple things. Remember I said something about how that top strip can give you trouble when you're putting that, when you get into this certain area. Here's just exactly what can happen to you. What happened here, the fellow was coming along just fine, then it started acting up a little here, you put a little snag in it, got tighter and tighter, he got over here, actually caught it right there. Once you put that kink in the edge of the dash insert, you're probably not going to get it together, or it's going to be together like this one was with the strip hanging off the edge of the insert. It probably didn't look real bad, but it certainly wouldn't have worked for any, first-class restoration. Another little problem, you'll notice I haven't put the bars on this yet. I always put the bars on last. Reason I do that is because it seems like if you have the bars on the insert while you're putting it in there, it actually stiffens the insert up, makes it a little harder to fit. When you're doing the bars, and this goes for pretty much any cast trim like this where you're going to use a speed nut, take your nut driver and run in this case, make sure you run it all the way to the bottom tight. When it comes off there, it's going to actually align that nut to the back of the insert. On a dash insert, that's extremely important. If you look at this insert, I think you might be able to see here the problem. Actually, the person was doing fine putting this together, got to the very last step, ran that nut up tight against there, and actually put a lump right in the dash insert, which you certainly won't want to put it back together that way. Just to remind you, this is really all about getting everything clean, getting the strips off there without damaging them, get everything cleaned, take your time, some patience. It's actually a relatively easy thing to do once you follow those rules. So good luck with it, and thanks for watching.